everybody, we're back for birdwatching part 2, where I hopefully will cover some more of the common species that you might be hearing in your backyard or around your house. And we're just going to jump right in with a species I probably should have included in the last video, but we're covering them now. The very well-known blue jay. I think probably most people have seen these guys running around. They're pretty common. They are very hard to miss because they are bright blue, one of the only common birds that's bright blue. And it's actually, their wings are almost a little bit metallic, so they're shiny blue too. They have their very noticeable crests similar to a cardinal, but these guys are big. They're much bigger than a cardinal. They're actually, I think, a little bit bigger than a robin. So they're hard to miss. And if you don't see them, you probably will still hear them, because they are very loud. They're usually in groups, and their voices are very hard to miss. It sounds like they're saying J in a really harsh, kind of raspy voice. But they also have a lot of variations on their calls, and it can be kind of confusing to folks, because you'll hear a noise and be like, what is that? And a lot of times it'll turn out to be a blue jay of all things. So again, here's their really common J call. Sounds like they're saying J, J. But it can have a slight variation to it, or be really squeaky like that last one. Or they can sound like rusty hinges. Particularly this last one. That noise is a blue jay. They sound like a rusty hinge. So if you hear all kinds of squawky, squeaky, weird sounds, there's a good chance it's one of these guys. And if you look around, you'll usually see them bopping around in the trees or in your lawn, and you can identify who's the culprit making that weird noise. Blue jays are also interesting in that they are very divisive. People either love them, usually, in my experience. They love them, they think they're beautiful, and they're so cool, and they're smart, and they're fun to have around. Or people really hate them because they're also a little bit of bird feeder bullies. They will shove other birds out of the way because they're bigger. They will gobble up all the good seeds and leave nothing else, or they'll dig through the bird feeder and shove all the good seeds on the ground and make a mess. So some people love them, some people hate them. If you have a bird feeder, I have not tried this personally, but I've had this suggested by several people who are veteran bird feeder people, that if you put peanuts out in a separate location, often you can convince the blue jays to eat the peanuts because they like them, and other birds won't eat them because they can't get through the big shell. And so sometimes that's a way, if you really don't love them, but they're coming to your feeder no matter what you do, you can try to lure them away with peanuts. Speaking of bird feeders, if you have a suet feeder, you will probably see one of these guys. The next bird, the white-breasted nuthatch. They have a big white chest, which is where they get their name. And they have, this picture isn't as good, I'll show you more in another picture. They have like a blue-gray back and this black racing stripe on their head. They're little guys. They're like chickadee-sized little teeny birds. And they eat mostly insects and stuff, but they love suet, anything that's rich like that. And they have a funny nasal sounding call. Almost like someone with like a nasal voice kind of laughing. And you'll see them running up and down trees making this noise. And they also can sometimes make the same call but faster, so it sounds a little bit different. But it still sounds like they're laughing. And it still has that nasal, kind of like someone's plugging their nose and making the noise. So the way I remember the sound of the nuthatch has to do with some of the behavior you'll see them doing. They are one of the only birds that can run down a tree trunk. It's actually really difficult to run down a tree trunk. Lots of birds can climb up it by running up it with their hanging on with their claws, but mostly only nuthatches can run down. So the way I remember nuthatches is it sounds like they're laughing at the other birds because they can do something the other birds can't. And they're just like, ha ha ha, look what I can do, other birds. I'm so cool. And this picture also shows you a little bit better their black racing stripe and the blue-gray of their back and their wings. Another bird that I had a few people ask me about is the eastern bluebird, and they're beautiful. They're one of my favorite species just because they're just really pretty. The males are very dark blue, or at least really deep saturated blue, and they have that red rufous belly. And the females are colored exactly the same way, just a little bit less intense. So they are also blue with the red belly. Sometimes they will be less saturated than the males, but unless they're standing right next to each other, sometimes it's hard to pick them apart. A lot of people ask, how can I get these guys to come to my bird feeder? And the answer is it's tricky, but sometimes it can work. So the first thing is that they do not eat seeds. So if you do want them to come to your bird feeder, you would need to bring them something that they would like. So mealworms, which are kind of gross if you don't like bugs, but they sell dried mealworms. You can put those out, and often you will lure in bluebirds because they love bugs. They eat all kinds of insects. The other thing is that they are a field species. They like grassy areas. They're not really a woods bird. So if you live somewhere that's mostly trees and not near anywhere open, you may not get as many bluebirds as you'd like. But you can also go walking in field areas. Sometimes there will be bluebird boxes for houses for them to nest in, and you can listen to them or watch for them because they're pretty obvious when they go flying by. And they also sound very distinctive. They sound kind of like somebody is playing a very tiny violin, but it's kind of scratchy, and they're not doing a very good job. Or someone who has a really raspy whistle. It has kind of an up and down like tone to it. So it goes up and then down and up and then down. But it's a little bit raspy. And they also have that call. Again, it's really kind of raspy. It sounds almost like someone's like stretching a string. So they're pretty distinctive. And if you're walking through a field and you hear that raspy violin call, it is an eastern bluebird. Another favorite, all the birds are my favorite, so I'm kind of biased, is this guy, the northern mockingbird. So they're a little bit a little bit smaller than a robin. So still fairly large, and they are called the mockingbird because they don't have a song of their own. They copy songs of other birds, and they show off to males show off to females by having as big a list of copied bird songs as possible. So you'll usually hear them singing somewhere like in a shrub or something, and it'll be like, there sounds like there are about 20 different birds coming out of that tree. What is going on? It's probably a northern mockingbird. So if you listen, you can actually sometimes even hear which bird they're copying if they're doing a good job. So you'll say, oh, there's a bird in that tree. And then it'll change its song. And you'll be like, wait, how many birds are in this tree? There we go. See, it's copying a Carolina wren. Tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. So sometimes you'll hear a bird and be like, oh, it's one of those. And then it'll change. And then it'll change again and be like, what the heck? So if you hear about 20 different birds coming out of a bush, it's potentially a northern mockingbird. It could be something else, and we'll get to that in just a second. The other reason I love these guys is they are pretty easy to identify. They're a big gray bird, and they have this big white spot on their wing. So when they open their wing up, it's like gray-black, but with a big white spot in the middle. And you'll see them fluttering around on the ground or opening their wings up in a display sometimes, and it's very easy to tell what they are because they have that big white spot. And you'll see them fluttering around because they can actually be kind of aggressive. You can see that white spot there a little bit better. Not to humans usually, unless you like really try to poke their nests, which any bird will get grumpy at you for that. But they get very territorial with other birds sometimes, like, this is where I live, this is where my food is, and leave me alone. And they will get kind of aggressive. So I think they're funny because they're like 2-ounce birds with about 20 pounds of I'll fight you in them. And sometimes you can see them throwing down with another bird and being like, get away from me. And I just think it's fun because they're just so gung-ho. So I said it could be a mockingbird in the tree if you hear a bunch of birds coming out. But it could also be one of these guys, another favorite of mine, the gray catbird, which is aptly named. It is a gray bird. It has a black cap and black tips to its tail and wings, and a bright kind of rusty red rump that sometimes you can see if you're not sure what the bird is, because you're like, oh, it's just a blob of gray. You can sometimes catch that rufous, they call it, colored rump. They also are mimics, so they also copy the songs of other birds and show off by saying, like, look how many different calls I know. So that can be a challenge to tell them apart. So here's the catbird. And I want you to listen and just see if you can tell a difference, but then I'll tell you what the difference is. So there's a slight difference in the way that sounds, and we'll go over the two of them together. First thing is, unlike the finches from last time, these guys are much easier to tell apart visually. They don't really look anything alike. Mockingbirds are bigger. They've got that bright yellow eye. They've got those white patches on their wings. They also tend to do that like wren style tail up posture, particularly because they're always full of fight me. And catbirds are this solid gray. They don't really have a lighter belly. They've got the dark tail and the rufous undertail part, and their black cap. So they look very different, which thankfully it makes it a lot easier if you just see one. But if you hear them, I'm going to play the mockingbird again. If you listen, the mockingbird repeats the different bird calls it knows like 4 times or more, usually. They don't really count. The birds don't count, but we can, before it moves on to another call. So it'll do like 4 Carolina wrens and then go on to like 4 or 5 cardinals or some other sound that you maybe don't recognize, but you'll notice that it's the same one over and over again, like 4 or 5, sometimes 6 times. So the mockingbird is trying to show off how many it knows, but also like really prove to you that it knows each call. Like, see, I know this call so well, I can do it over and over and over again. Look how awesome I am. Whereas the catbird, it's very excited to show you all its calls. So it's going to do one after another, after another, after another. But it also has a specific call that just belongs to the catbird. And it's this kind of meow, little kind of cat mew noise, like a cat trying to get your attention, which is where it gets its name. So I'll play it again. Hear that? That was the meow. So you hear all these bird calls one at a time, just once, maybe twice, and then you'll hear the meow. That meow call is very diagnostic of the catbird. So you'll hear a whole bunch of single songs. Maybe occasionally they'll do 2 in a row of the same song. And then this little cat meow noise. And that's how you know that whatever songs are coming out of that bush over there belongs to the catbird. So last time I did a thing that some people think is a bird but isn't. So I'm going to do another one. And this is probably something you've heard if you go anywhere near water or like marshy areas, kind of like the same places often that you'll hear red-winged blackbirds. You'll hear this kind of high-pitched beeping. And a lot of times you'll hear it, a bunch of them at once. Beep, 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 beep. And I've had some people ask me, are those birds? There's a lot of them. They're not. They're one of my favorite animals in the world, the spring peeper. They're tiny little frogs. And in the springtime, as you can tell by their name, they all come out of hibernation and start beeping at each other to try to find a mate. And this one is hard to tell, but they have a dark X that goes over their back. So if you ever see a tiny little brown frog with a little dark X on its back, it's a very good chance it is a spring peeper. They're super cool because they, similar to another species that we have in our area called a wood frog, they are able to freeze solid. So they don't go south for the winter or anything like that. If it gets so cold that the water around them starts freezing and then the water in their tissues starts freezing, they have kind of a natural antifreeze in their body tissue that allows them to survive being frozen for up to a week, which I think is really cool. So they're really, really strong survivors, and they're tiny and adorable, and they sound really, really neat. Sometimes you'll hear them at night or in the mornings if you live anywhere where there's a marsh, and they are another quintessential sound of spring. So I hope you guys enjoyed this round. I will do another one soon. If you have specific birds or anything you're curious about, or if you hear sounds and you're not sure what they are, leave a comment or send an email and ask, and I can hopefully help you figure out what it was. And until then, I'll see you next time.